Ready when you are.
Hello listeners, hello viewer, this is Matt again with just another little quick reminder as to what we're doing on I'll Explain Later over the next few weeks. This week we've got another excerpt from our Missing Presumed Wiped 2019 episode. This week we've got a review of Gridlock. Yeah, if you listened to last week's show, you'll know that we're taking a couple of weeks off recording, but we found this episode, which we recorded back in 2019 when we were doing 3 stories per episode, which we thought was lost to the ages when I poured a cup of coffee over my laptop, but thankfully we found it on a backup drive recently and have edited and restored it to, I'm not going to say glory, but something approaching release standard here. This was from an episode that was loosely themed around bugs, critters, creepy crawlies. Last week we had Frontios, we got Gridlock this week, and then next week we'll have our review of the Web Planet. I hope you enjoy it and have a great week. Okay, John, so what's next tonight on our trilogy of creature features?
Gridlock, which I just thought I'd go straight for it.
Yeah, I liked it. I like the energy.
Yeah, Gridlock.
Can we sustain it?
We can sustain Gridlock. So this was broadcast 14th of April 2007. This is from season 3 of New Who, and I suppose is the last in the Russell T Davies Far Future trilogy.
Yep.
With humanity having escaped the Earth, which obviously burned in Series 1. We visited New Earth in Series 2, along with Cassandra in the episode that was imaginatively titled
New Earth.
And then we have Gridlock, which is the kind
of... Does Frontios fit into that chronology, do you think? Because obviously we saw the Earth get consumed by a solar flare in the end of the world.
And Turlo mentions...
Season 1, and then Turlo mentions that's what happened and humanity's dispersed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it does.
Okay,
yeah.
Good.
Not that it's really
How pleasing.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that, but because when I was watching Frontios, I watched it after I'd watched Gridlock, and I was kind of thinking to myself, I don't hope this all makes sense. And I thought, yeah, it kind of does.
Yeah.
So even though I sort of scoff at...
the details are so vague.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like you squint at it, it sort of fits
But
together.
even though I sort of scoff at people who care too much about that kind of thing, I found myself caring about it.
It's pleasing when it does.
It is. It doesn't exclude it.
Good for them.
Yeah, I thought... Well done, RTD, who, of course... Russell T Davies, of course, wrote this episode.
Yes.
Directed by Richard Clarke, who also directed The Doctor's Wife. And the usual smorgasbord of people around that team at the time, obviously including, of course, Murray Gold doing the music.
Yep.
So yeah, he takes the 10th Doctor takes Martha Jones to Dr. Martha Jones to New Earth to give her a taste of the future. She clocks pretty early on that he's kind of taking her to the places that he took Rose, which is a wee bit awkward.
Yep. Awkward.
But things have gone wrong on New Earth because there's kind of a drug epidemic, recreational drug epidemic, but the drugs seem focused on making people forget their worries, which I suppose people do with drugs, but there's no, it's a pretty bleak kind of setup.
Yep.
And people are trying to escape the slums and get to the higher levels by joining a sort of a cavalcade, I suppose, a convoy of cars that are stuck on the motorway. And unbeknownst to the people on the motorway, some of whom have been there for decades almost, actually they're never going to leave because there's been a viral outbreak on the surface, and there's a quarantine situation, and
they're the only ones left.
Yeah, and a bit like with Frontios, actually, there's a sense to which the kind of secrecy and withholding of information and the lack of communication is a major problem here. People,
and the Doctor's solution involves getting everyone onto the same page.
Yes. I mean, it does help, but by that point, I mean, it's really odd actually because the face of Bo, who is keeping the kind of lid on things and making sure that people survive, and the cat nurse woman whose name I can't.
Novice Hayne.
Novice Hayne. Presumably she's not a novice by this point. I mean,
she's a veteran.
Veteran Hayne. They sort of say that the virus that killed people also itself died almost as quickly as it came. So presumably they could have just released everyone to the surface a lot earlier. I don't think that it's intended as a beat within the plot.
No,
but it's just
an detail. But yes,
it's an inconsistency that bothered me. So Martha gets kidnapped by some people who want to join the fast lane, and you need to have 3 people in the car, sort of carpool situation to get into the fast lane. But unbeknownst to her kidnappers and her, the fast lane is also populated by our crabby friends, the Macra.
Crabby friends.
Crabby friend. I'm your crabby friend, Matt. Speaking of which, how crabby did Gridlock make you? I think this has a reputation as rather a lightweight episode. But I don't want to necessarily prejudice your comments on this. So, how did you find it?
I really like this. I'd not watched it since it went out. I think it's great. I think it's probably not a huge amount to say about it, but I think it encapsulates a lot of stuff that I've always really liked about Russell T Davies's work on Doctor Who. I think it's a very good example of the Russell T Davies filler episode, where he has a week of Doctor Who to fill. And unlike, I think, some of the classic series writers where, oh my God, we've got to do another episode of Doctor Who seems to sometimes bring out the worst in everyone. I always think those are the situations that bring out the best in Russell T Davies. I think quite often he comes badly unstuck when he has to do the big epic narrative sweep at the end of a series or to wrap something up. But I think given 45 minutes to fill, he is extremely good at pulling together a bunch of disparate elements and weaving them into something that I think makes for a decent bit of telly. I think in this case it's pretty straightforward. That it's almost I kind of think he approaches these episodes like science fiction short story writers who have basically there's one key beat to this, which is that people spend a lot of time on the motorway, and what if in the far future all we ever did was spend all our time in the motorway, and then he builds that out. The thing that impressed me this time round, I mean, and I think it's full of things that I like about Russell T Davies. It's got some fun characters, it's got some funny lines, it's got some interesting ideas. It's in parts almost coruscatingly bleak, but it nevertheless manages to rally. Somehow, probably doesn't stand up to a huge amount of scrutiny if you look at it up close, but to something that gives you at least some sort of uplift at the end. I was also really impressed this time round watching it and thinking of it as an exercise in TV logistics, because I think this is also, it's a very cheap episode, and I mean that in a good way, in that it's composed of bits and pieces. Really, it's some leftover costumes and bits of set from old episodes. They've not really, so obviously that's the cat costumes and makeup returns. The face of Bo prop gets another airing. The actual sets that they built for this are incredibly small. I mean, I imagine they probably only built one car cabin thing and redressed it. And the rest of it is all done in the computer, basically. There are no exterior shots. There's a lot of CGI. A lot of it is reused from the New Earth episode in the previous season. You know, there's a bit where when in the opening scenes they see an image on the TV of what New York is meant to look like, and it is a effect shot taken directly from New Earth, so they've even reused some of the footage. But then, you know, out of all of these elements, he's able to string them together into something that gets you some fun characters. You know, it's all the different trips through all the different cars that the Doctor goes through on his quest to find Martha, and they're just these sort of, you know, essentially quite silly one-note characters, but it's a fun sort of cavalcade of faces and people that he bumps into on the way.
Yeah.
I to be honest, I don't think it amounts to a hill of beans, but I think it shows that I personally feel that that's the side of Russell T Davies that I like now and that I think holds up best in retrospect, is actually where he has one idea, a bunch of elements he needs to use, and 45 minutes to fill, and it's breezy and it's throwaway, and I think it works entirely on that basis. I think it's a very enjoyable episode of Doctor Who. John?
Yeah, I generally agree with you in terms of Russell T Davies often being somewhat at his best with those constraints, and it's when having to. I feel this, however, is almost like this is an episode where, and I bow to no one in my respect for Russell T Davies, both on Doctor Who and his other work, but this feels to me like it's lazy.
Okay.
I feel this is really lazy. And actually the kind of the you can really see his working on this and all his box of tricks, rather than the box of tricks being sleight of hand and you focus on what you're meant to focus on. I feel like that some of the beats here are so lazy that you kind of see the string pulling, and it's ultimately not very satisfying as a result. I have to say, just watching it as a breezy 45-minute Saturday night piece of television, I think it's all right. I think I don't hate it, but if I'm sitting down to kind of really think about it,
yes,
it's very slight. I'm not sure that there's not much of a thematic thing to get your head into. I know you said that, but I just think as well it's a pretty lazy piece of writing. I mean, look, the quick kidnap, Freema Agyeman's character being kidnapped right at the beginning, it's a cheap setup. It's an effective one, but it's very lazy. You don't really have an investment in. I guess at that point it's still potentially a mystery why she's been kidnapped, but it just felt very right. Okay, we've created the peril now, but it just seemed a bit lazy. There are a couple of bits and pieces. I usually am all over a Russell T Davies kind of patch quilted kind of, having 20 characters in an episode and all of them
in quick succession. Yeah.
Yeah, and all of them managing to be sold with one line. But he really does seem to just go, right, this guy's a businessman in a bowler hat and this guy's a cheerful Irishman. And it's just a bit... The one thing I will say in terms of what you were saying about the logistics of television and doing it on the cheap is what I really love, and I just think it's funny and works, is that the cat man and his wife, who's like fully human, the fact that they have kids and they are just kittens. It's not like they haven't kind of
Which must have been odd for her.
Right? But I just thought that was both funny and obviously cheap, and it was just a nice little thing that they would kind of develop their humanness later, but they're just kittens. It's really cute. Even the old lesbian couple seems kind of, I don't know, there was something so twee about that kind of, isn't it nice that they're married? And I don't know, like I feel bad saying that because I'm usually all over any kind of attempt to and especially at the time.
It was 12 years ago. I mean, it's like things. It's sort of. I mean, obviously, it's not like you're comparing the 1950s to now or something. Yeah. But there's, the story has moved on considerably in that time.
I don't know. They just seemed so hinge and bracket. And that's something else that it suffers from. I think maybe like to the extent they almost like looked like they were trying to be a clan d'oeil to hinge and bracket, which if people don't know was an old kind of UK sort of quasi music hall, kind of contemporary of Danny LaRue, drag act.
I mean, it might,
but like the couple at the very beginning, why are they dressed as the American Gothic?
I know.
Couple?
I made a note of that. I quite, but then why not? I mean, it's because I quite enjoyed. The only reason I sort of flagged that actually is that a shot of that couple it was used at the end of The Runaway Bride, where there was the coming soon in Doctor Who, and there's the montage of clips from the upcoming season. The shot of the American Gothic couple was in there, and the amount of fan speculation that went into overdrive about, what that story could be and whether the painting was going to come to life or he was, and linking all this together, and the theorizing about, there was a bit of American filming for the Dalek story. And then in the end, I just quite like the fact it turned out to be a couple who, some wag in the design team has thought, why don't we dress them as the American Gothic couple? And that's what's happened.
And they're just sort of pre-credit Macra fodder. That's
Macra
it.
fodder, yeah.
Then, just, again, something I usually love when Russell T Davies does it, the effective use of backlight, so I suppose you could call it diegetic media.
Yes.
To kind of tell you what's going on. So rather than have character info dumps or to set the scene.
News 24's on.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And here you've got Sally Calypso, which is such a Russell T Davies name. But Sally Calypso's traffic report to kind of set the mood for what's going on.
But also none of those things from that era, I also think, apart from when they actually have had cameos from real news reporters, none of them have ever felt real. Because is it Trinity Wells, the American news reporter, who I think now is appearing in Big Finish stories. I'm not.
Well, good for her. I mean, I'm not going to.
I'm glad they found some mileage for that character, but it's always the there's a couple of people, I can't remember the name, so I can't give a shout out annoyingly. But there's a couple of people I follow on Twitter who've pointed this out about and it's not just in Doctor Who, but bad fake news media, bad fake news reports in TV shows about actually how hard that is to get right. I think drama people just assume you can just make something and it looks like news.
I think the best one is the guy from Sky whose name I can't remember, and Krishna Guru Murthy, I think, in Shaun of the Dead.
Oh yeah.
I can't believe I'm saying this. What is it?
Destroying the head and remove the brain.
Yeah.
Extraordinary. It's like,
that's definitely the best.
Yeah.
That's the gold standard. But I think this one again doesn't work, and the kind of zoom in on the pixels while something bad is happening and the person is saying something breezy. It's just so I don't know. I just feel like I've seen it many times before. As for and I say this is again as a big fan of RTD, big fan of Tennant, but this alley closes tonight. The big speech about the selling
unearned
the drug.
Angry speech.
The unearned angry speech about the drugs. And at that point, he has no idea what the context is, what the problems are that people might be trying to escape, what those people are going to do for livelihoods if they're not selling these drugs out of their converted burger vans. I don't know. It's so unearned. It's so unthought out. It's so It's just, and it's so bloody self-congratulatory and self-righteous, and it's just it's everything that's wrong with the 10th Doctor handled badly, both by the writers and by Tennant himself, I have to say. And then finally, look, the whole kind of chorus singing of the old rugged cross and Abide with Me. I just find that stuff overwrought, fabulously overwrought, and too obvious. And there's a nice idea there about the fact that there is still that community of disparate people, and that they find a way that we will always find a way to build communities even in the toughest of circumstances. I don't necessarily hate the mechanics of the story. It's just that it's all done in the laziest way possible. With the exception, I will say, of when everyone is singing Abide With Me and then Martha and the Doctor finally have that conversation about Gallifrey. That, for me, is far and away it's the standout part of the episode, where Tennant is quietly acting a moment and just even as he's trying to be honest with Martha about the loss of his planet and the loss of his family, he just at the end, and that's clever, I think. In order to stop talking about it, starts talking about how lovely the planet was.
Yeah.
And even though it's with plausible deniability, he's still talking about the same thing. It's turned into him avoiding having to talk about the worst aspects of that. That's quite clever. So I'll give it that, but that's kind of like the final 90 seconds of the piece. I just think it's pretty lazy.
I mean, I would actually pick up on a couple of things you've said there. That, I mean, I don't have a huge. I mean, I think there's some very good bits in them, but those second and third series of New Who, I'm not. I certainly don't rate as highly as well. I do very much like the fourth, and I absolutely love the first. I think the Christopher Eccleston series is sort of nigh on unimpeachably good. And
yeah, first, fourth, and specials. I think. Well, the specials are lumpy, but Waters
first,
of Mars
fourth,
and
a few of the specials.
Yeah.
You mentioned in the Abide With Me scene here is an interesting rabbit hole that the series goes down this year. In the final story, there's a real attempt
evangelical and even religious kind of...
Yes, which I don't really understand. I mean, given... I remember at the time... a lot of the Christ imagery in the Paul McGann film was considered to be a little bit too on the nose. The death and rebirth and the crown of thorns. Here, it's sort of almost ridiculous that there is this sort of messianic fervour to the Doctor as saviour figure as people are literally singing Abide With Me. And then we have... in the final episode in Last of the Time Lords, where the Doctor is raised from the dead by the power of prayer, that people sort of pray to him. It's an interesting cul-de-sac that Davis goes down there. I mean, Davis's conception of the Doctor.
Hey, hang on. He's got form of being interested in religion, though. I mean, the Second Coming he wrote, of course,
form of being interested in religion.
Starring role for Christopher Eccleston.
But it's interesting that I think for this year only, he decides that this is the angle in which he wants to take the Doctor down. Now, I think across the two incarnations of the Doctor that Davis is showrunner for, his conception of the Doctor, I think, sits much more comfortably in line with a lot of the quote-unquote paranormal romance teen fiction that's coming out at the time, your Twilights and your subsequent Twilight knockoffs, that the idea of the Doctor as being a romantic figure cursed with immortality, essentially, that he is a romantic and a lover of life and a lover of people, but it is his curse to see them sort of wither and die around him.
Yeah,
and in the other 3 years, and especially in the specials, that is the kind of driving heartbeat of it. But for 1 year, Davis sort of decides that the Doctor is Christ, and it's an odd decision. And
yeah, I mean, Russell T Davies is an atheist.
Yes.
Which kind of does make you scratch your head. I came across a Telegraph article on while I was thinking about this, and this is a Telegraph article from May 2008 about a conference at which Church of England vicars watched a series of episodes or a series of scenes from Doctor Who that touched on, and I'm quoting from the article, themes of resurrection, redemption, and evil. And so, they've got this quote from Barry Letts, obviously a former producer of the show, who said, "I think it's inevitable that there would be religious parables or parallels." He says, "I think it's inevitable because of Britain's cultural heritage that a long-running programme about the fight between good and evil will have some Christian themes as a backdrop." And I suspect that's where he's going, in the sense that the need for redemption, resurrection, a fight between good and evil, the need for that is so embedded in humanity and embedded around the tropes of Christianity because of us culturally being where we are in the world, but that you don't necessarily need to ally those things to a strict Christian theology in order to explore the human need for those stories.
Well, that's what the Second Coming is, basically. It's
right.
That Christ returns and says, you don't need to do any of this.
Yeah.
Which is basically, that's what happens in the Second Coming.
Yeah. I suppose in this sense, because we're not even talking about Christian parallels.
But that works dramatically in the Second Coming because it is about Christ.
Yeah.
Whereas
I don't think you can convincingly say that Gridlock is a question of the place of theologically correct religious fervour in a society that's become more secular. No. So that's not what Gridlock is.
No, and it's not what Last of the Time Lords is either, and it's not what anything is in this season.
No.
It's I think that perhaps someone looked that Davis might have watched Last Temptation of Christ recently and thought, well, that's a good dramatic engine for doing this season.
Yeah, and that's why I think that this is lazy, and it's also why I think, we haven't covered it yet, so spoilers, but it's why I think Last of the Time Lords is lazy as well. It doesn't seem to be about any of that stuff, and yet it has these conclusions or massive plot points or massive scenes that insist that was what the discussion was about all the time, and it doesn't earn that anywhere.
No. Also, he's one of the other things that I think really lets this season down is how misguided the whole Martha plotline is.
Yeah, the unrequited love thing.
Yeah, of which that he is, it doesn't seem to work for anyone really in terms of, I mean, I know obviously that I presume it's working on the assumption that everyone absolutely loved Billie Piper in Doctor Who, and that for her to disappear and for the Doctor to make another new best friend with the speed that he always does would maybe feel crass. To be honest, I don't think, it's season to season. I think you could allow the Doctor some space to move on. I don't think you really need to see that mourning process for Rose bleed into the next season. I think you're allowed a certain reset.
Yeah.
But neither of them come out of it very well. It makes Martha, I think, one of the most frustratingly sort of passive victim characters in modern Doctor Who, of the sort of regular characters. And it also makes the Doctor into an insensitive shit. I mean, to
be fair, at least Russell T Davies is aiming for that.
It is, but that's a bad idea.
No, I'm not necessarily saying it's something he should have done, but at least he's aiming for it.
No, absolutely, he knows what he's doing. I mean, that bit at the end where obviously the bomb that the face of Bow drops, the "you are not alone" thing, which the Doctor sort of instantly takes to mean what it does mean, that the face of Bow is suggesting that there's another Time Lord out there.
Yeah.
And the Doctor thinks that this is an impossibility, but understands it on that level. Whereas Martha suggests, as if to say, oh, maybe he means you've got me. And the Doctor essentially just goes, nah, sorry, love, not talking about you. Got bigger fish to fry. And it's sort of, yes, it's that's the thing. I mean, it is deliberate. It's not like the Sixth Doctor and Perry, where all of these things were entirely accidentally left in the script and leave an incredibly unpleasant aftertaste. It's deliberate, but it's like, why? It's such a bad idea.
Well, I'm not sure all of it was unintended in the Sixth Doctor.
No, true. No. I suppose him being a shit was
kind of
the point.
Design, but again, not necessarily a good thing to do with your hero.
No.
I just, like I say, I don't have an awful lot more to say about this. I mean, the other thing is that this is such a primary colours episode, which wears its heart on its sleeve and nails its colours to the mast and blah blah blah. It feels like it is an allegory. It's structured and pinpointed as if it's an allegory, but it doesn't appear to be an allegory of anything. It has all of the kind of,
it's just some stuff,
markers and tropes that would suggest allegory, but it's just some stuff. I mean, what are we meant to take from this? Is there a pollution message, an overcrowding message,
drugs message?
It's all of it. There is a
religion message.
Yeah, it doesn't really land any of those things. It's just, it is, as you say, a filler episode, and he's found 45 minutes of script to turn into a piece. And I don't deny that there are some entertaining bits in it. I quite like Ardlo Hanlon as Finnegan O'Laherty O'Bliason or whatever.
Filthy McNasty.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
I quite like him. He's jolly and the stuff. It's fine. It's fine, but it's bloody lazy. I remember it being on at the time, and I remember thinking, oh yeah, okay, fair enough. Looking at it again, it doesn't stand up to a second viewing at all. And in fact, the working that really starts to show for me.
Were you pleased to see the Macra again, though?
I was. I actually was.
I do remember watching it at the time and seeing, like, when he looks down and the sort of smog starts to clear and there's a whole bunch of giant crabs down there and there's a beat before he says, and I remember thinking, like, they've not brought the Macra back, are they? And then he goes, Macra. It's like, oh shit. They did.
But apparently they've devolved because they don't need to be clever anymore, because there's just all this stuff they can eat, so they don't need to be clever anymore. They're just
Yeah, I couldn't work out whether there was something. It felt to me like that was a crowbar to justify them being the Macra rather than
Just crabs.
generic crab monsters.
Yeah.
Which, it makes a good point. He at least acknowledges the fact that the Macra, as last seen in the Macra Terror, are sneaky and manipulative and managed to maintain a simulacrum of a functioning society within the holiday camp that they've taken over.
Yeah.
Whereas here they are just snapping and slashing.
They're just a monster.
They're just a monster. But
I this is actually I will
a nice
give
bit of fan service.
Yeah, and it's the kind of fan service that Russell T Davies was always very good at, in the sense that it was it did not impinge on what he was doing to include it. So he decided to include it. So that's fine. It's just that what it was not impinging on was very lazy.